Today is Friday. In the church calendar, it's known as Good Friday. I've always found that name to be a little odd. It's the day we celebrate, remember, I don't know if celebration's the right word, but the crucifixion, the Jesus being put to death in a horrific and brutal way. And yet we call this Good Friday.
It's an irony.
Yeah.
It is good for us because we did need a Savior. We did need someone to offer this life for us, or we would die. We would not
We
live.
would remain in separation from God. And this is part of how God, I mean, there's a lot of mystery here, but this is how God puts the world to right, to quote N.T. Wright.
Yeah.
That God's putting the world to rights. So Thursday night, Jesus has had the dinner, had the meal. He's told his disciples some things that they're struggling with. Then they go out to Gethsemane, where Jesus is going to pray. Jesus knows that Judas will betray him. And why do you think, and I've always, I used to struggle with this a little bit, like the Jewish authorities and the Roman authorities knew who Jesus was. Why did they need Judas to come find him in the Garden of Gethsemane late in the night?
Well, I think it would have been a twofold function. One, they wanted to know where he was. Two, to be able to identify him specifically would have been important. They all look alike. Maybe that's what they've been saying, so they didn't get the wrong person. But they certainly anticipated that Judas would lead them, and maybe even by seeing a familiar face, keep.
I get all that. I also think there's a very important element here. It's under the cover of darkness. The Sabbath begins at sunrise, which means nobody moves, right? In Jewish tradition, the day begins at sunrise, it ends at sunset. So you're just hours away from the sun coming up, which means most people would be in their homes, having already prepared for the Sabbath, asleep. There are no crowds around. And I think there's a key here, right, that those crowds, the Romans certainly didn't want to riot. The temple authorities don't want to riot. And what we see happen here is Jesus is arrested, prosecuted, all under the cover of darkness, away from the crowds, and that is so important because it's a clandestine act. It's a miscarriage of justice. There's no due process here.
So back a few years ago, Steve and I got to go, and we walked these paths. We saw where Jesus would have been arrested there in the Garden of Gethsemane, in this among the olive trees, taken a fairly short distance, taken and prosecuted there, would have been lowered into this
It was the house
cave.
of Caiaphas.
House of Caiaphas. He would have been lowered into what would almost been like a dungeon, where they would have done the torture of him.
Well, and it was a dry cistern, most likely, lowered into the pit. And when you read the Psalm, so many times it says, "Save me from the pit. Do not let me go into the pit." Jesus was literally in a pit down deep below the house of Caiaphas, while the Sanhedrin, the religious council, were deciding his fate.
So that's where the torture would have begun: the beating, the flogging, the spitting, the hitting, the slapping. All of this would have been
respectful behavior. And in the courtyard above is where you get the drama of Peter playing out. It's where you're going to get the sun coming up, which is interesting. The very people who were so adamant about the law actually seem to be breaking that law, because they take Jesus to
Pilate.
Not Pilate. No. And I misspoke there. The Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday, not at sunrise on Friday. So it begins at sundown on Friday. But still, it's under the cover of darkness. So many people busy making preparations for the Sabbath would have, again, missed this completely.
And so then the injustice is in process. Jesus is brought back and forth between Roman authorities, Jewish authorities. Pilate washes his hand of the whole thing, says, if you want to crucify him, you do it. So Jesus ends up being drug out, walked to this god-awful place, the place of the skull, just outside of the community, and made to carry, at this time weakened from blood loss, weakened from dehydration, weakened from the whole experience. He would have been the sheer injury itself. He would have been near death at that point. He is moving toward that.
And while the Gospels aren't perfectly aligned on what, when, where, what they are aligned on is that Jesus is found guilty of of blasphemy by the Sanhedrin. He is turned over to the Romans, who more or less the crime that Jesus would be committed there is treason or insurrection, and he is then crucified for that. And the Romans knew how to kill people.
Romans had that system down to a.
And crucifixion was meant to not just kill someone, it was meant to send a message to everybody else. That's why you have the public flogging and beating. That's why you have and the whole process is meant to weaken, humiliate. The idea of being hung on a cross is to inflict as much pain. And the way that what actually typically kills someone in crucifixion is that you can't respirate. You can't, because you're hanging there, you can't lift yourself up to breathe, and more or less you die of congestive heart failure as your body cavity fills up with fluids.
And as Steve said, they wanted to get all this over with by sundown, so that
the Jews did.
Passover.
The Romans are like, whatever, but
so the Sabbath could happen. So they come and they're watching Jesus, and in the Gospel of Mark, nobody really ever understood Jesus' identity. Mm-hmm. And in this fascinating passage,
it's fascinating because in Mark's Gospel early, the demons recognize
demons are the only ones,
right.
But no human being ever gets it right. But in this fascinating passage from Mark chapter 15, as Jesus is dying, it was indeed this Roman centurion that has watched Jesus endure the suffering, endure the pain, cry out what he does on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. And he looks and he says, as he watches Jesus die, as he watches him draw his last breath, he's moved to say, truly, this man was God's Son. I've always found that so fascinating, that a Roman centurion, a Roman soldier who would not have known all of the prophecies, the scriptures, everything that would have gone into this, he simply watches how he dies, and he's moved to say, this man was God's Son.
It also tells us something about the very physical presence of Jesus. There's something different about this guy. Yeah. And that in this moment, just who Jesus is, even without, again, the teaching, without the prophecy, this man recognizes it. And he is as outside as he can be. And the irony here is that the ones who should have known how to identify the Messiah, they didn't. The one who shouldn't have been able to identify the Messiah could.
So we've set the stage and we've focused on the events of Holy Week up until Friday. But it's Friday, as the famous pastor once said, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. Mm-hmm. We're going to invite you to, especially on Sunday morning, if you've experienced these events, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the death of Jesus, then you're going to be ready to hear the greatest news the world has ever known, that even death, even violence, even the sin, the brokenness of the world, nothing.
Yeah, the powers and principalities.
There was nothing
Forces
that could
of evil.
stop the love of God from overcoming sin and death, and that's the message of Easter.
And that we don't, we rejected God's yes to us. Mm. And then God says yes to us all over again, despite the rejection, despite the refusal to believe. God continues to say yes. That's grace.
That's grace.
And
So we'll have more to say about that at Huntersville on Good Friday evening at 7 p.m. outside under our portico as we literally watch the cross unfold, looking outside. What's going on at Denver on Friday?
well, we're going to your church, evidently, because part of what we're doing on Thursday is taking folks through the whole
Experience?
the whole drama, the whole story, all the way through Good Friday, all on Thursday night. I do encourage anyone who's looking for a Holy Week experience of Good Friday to make
come
the
to our
trip
church.
over
We'd
to
love to bring a chair.
yeah.
Bring a chair. And then I would remind you also for folks at Huntersville that on Easter sunrise service, 7 a.m. at Veterans Park there in Huntersville, our own Tosh Jenkins is going to be bringing the word. We'll be joining together with churches, Huntersville Presbyterian, Huntersville First Baptist, and Independence Hill Baptist. Bring a chair again. We'd love to have you come and celebrate as a community, Huntersville community, and anybody's, of course, invited. The greatest news the world could ever hear.
And here we'll gather starting about 6:45 a.m. in the cemetery at the cross, have sunrise service, then 8:15 in the sanctuary, 9 o'clock our praise team's doing a special Easter presentation, and then back into the sanctuary at 11 o'clock for our final service of Easter morning.
And we'll be out in our traditional outdoor worship space, 10 a.m. on Easter morning, with music for about the first 20, 30 minutes. And then as we go into the powerful narrative of Jesus' resurrection from the dead, it's going to be a good week, Steve.
Yeah, it's gonna and it should be a week of lots of ups and downs, and different emotions. But ultimately, the reason we're talking about this is because of what will happen on Sunday morning. Because if Jesus isn't resurrected, we're not talking about any of this.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing you, and may the Lord be with you.
And thank you. Have a great week, but a prayerful week, and look forward to what God is going to do among God's people.